morning.
Hi.
Good, fantastic. Folks, thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on the importance of being in a good place today. I, for one, am delighted to be here this morning. This is a topic I feel particularly passionate about, and it's always a great honour to be able to be asked to chair these events. And the only difference I think today is that, as well as being on Zoom, this is the first time I'll be chairing this event in my slippers as well this morning. So that's an extra bonus for us. So my name is Jenny Duggan, and I am the Community Navigator for Mid and East Antrim, and I am based at the Older People's Charity Mid and East Antrim Age Well Partnership. So we have a fantastic lineup today, as usual, and there's going to be lots of great advice and information on preparing for end of life, and again, the importance of being in a good place today. So a couple of housekeeping bits and pieces first. So folks, we would really appreciate if everyone could keep themselves on mute for the speakers. And as well as that, just to, I'm sure you're all aware, the session is being recorded as well. Any comments you have, you feel free to pop them into the chat. There will also be a question and answer, a couple of question and answer sessions throughout today's event. The hashtags, please go on to Twitter, spread the word. The hashtags, I think it's coming up there at the start. Please use them, spread the word, tweet, tag each other. Let's get the conversation going. So that's fantastic. And as well as that, we would really ask if people could, if possible, please do keep your cameras on. We just think there's a lot more engagement that way, and it's nicer for the speakers as well. So thank you so much, folks. I am going to pass over to Alison Campbell-Smith, who is going to do our opening remarks. And Alison is the Assistant Director of Community Care for the Northern Trust.
Thanks, Jenny, and good morning, everyone. It's always worrying when somebody says you're being recorded. I'm a terrible one for telling stories about my family when I talk, and it's okay when it's live and they might never hear those stories being told. Now it's recorded, I'll have to watch what I say. Thanks for the invite and the opportunity to welcome you all here today. I am Alison Campbell-Smith. I'm the Assistant Director in Northern Trust Community Care, and I have responsibility for palliative care. And over the recent months that I've been in post, I've had the opportunity to engage with a number of these events around dying matters and dying well, and it's a great thing that I kind of, I've said this before, I kind of grown up in a culture where we lots of older folk in the family, and we do death well in our family. It's something that has been talked about, but I know that's not everybody's experience, and it's such an important thing. Northern Ireland culture, I always think, is a bit fatalistic. You know, you meet somebody in the street and you say, hello, how are you? And oh, another clean shirt will do me, or I'm above the ground, or whatever that is. And we kind of accept it. No good conversation with my mum can be had without hearing the latest death notices from the local community, people who I maybe haven't seen since I was 5-year-old. But we talk about death, and yet when I was thinking about this and thinking about my kids, that's maybe not their experience. And we've lost folk in our family, and we've had sudden deaths of younger members of the family, and you talk about it, but yet you don't talk about it. And suddenly it happens, and then maybe it's a bit taboo. And certainly from a clinician's point of view, I worked for many years now. I should have welcomed, I'm very remiss, I should have welcomed our colleagues over from Northwest Compassionate Communities joining us alongside our Northern Trust folk today. I spent many years working in Altnagelvin, and a lot of the folk that I worked with would have had life-limiting conditions, and I clinically wanted to make sure that they were looked after. But on a more social, practical level, those conversations were much more difficult to have. COVID has brought death into our living rooms in the past 18 months. We know on a daily basis what the death toll has been in Northern Ireland today because of COVID. Yesterday there was one COVID-related death. We know about England, Scotland, Wales. We know about Spain, Brazil, India. We've never been surrounded by death as much as we have been this past 18 months. We've never had the volume, I suppose, to deal with. And yet it's brought a really stark reality that we have lost loved ones, and we've been robbed of the opportunity to have conversations with them about how they want to die, where they want to die, what their funeral wishes are. I'm married to a minister, and you know, our kids and myself, we're very aware of the privilege he has of journeying with people through diagnosis of cancer and other things, planning funerals, and the privilege that is to journey with families, and there's very special time there. But there's also the reality that many folk maybe don't have that opportunity to plan. They haven't had those conversations. And that's where Dying Matters as a movement is absolutely fantastic. The fact that this is Dying Matters Week, that we have a space and time to focus on these things, that we want to really bring home the public health message of it's everybody's business to talk about and plan well for our death. Dying Matters Awareness Week, Northern Trust have been engaged in for many years, and for this year there's a bit of a challenge in today's webinar. We want to really focus on the five key things. If everybody goes away today and thinks about for themselves, for their families, their loved ones, but their communities as well, the challenge to get a will written, to know our funeral wishes, to plan for our long-term care and support. Don't wait to that critical moment where you're suddenly looking at palliative care specialists who I work with and looking at end-of-life care, but plan ahead. Think about organ donation and actually tell people what your wishes are. Today's webinar is going to give us very practical support in all of these areas. We're going to hear some speakers talking about our legal areas, our funeral director planning our funerals. The last webinar we had on this topic was back in March, and I think I maybe even said then when I was speaking that 50 years of age, big party last year. Well, not because it was a COVID birthday, so there was no big party, and I don't have a will. And I wrote down at the end of the webinar in big capital letters, will. I'm looking at my notes here, and my husband was able to inform me this morning that actually the solicitor is booked in for us to get the wills written. So I took a challenge at the end of the last webinar to go and have conversations and to do something about a will. So I did it. I haven't quite had the meeting apparently is set up in the next week, so at least that's good. But the really exciting bit about today, and I think many of you will have been picked up on this, is about our digital afterlife. And I was at breakfast this morning, my big son was saying to me, what are you doing today? And I said, well, I was joining this webinar this morning. And he said, oh, right, that's not a happy topic. And I said, well, it might be a happier topic at the end of today, because we have a savings account for our son. Many of us will have started when they were born. I don't even know the password to get into that account. There's money goes into it every month. I don't know the password. He's little chance of knowing the password. And I said, so if I don't figure out how to sort out my digital afterlife, Josh, the millions that are sitting in that bank account aren't going to be yours. So today, I really hope that you get a lot out of this very practical webinar, but I also hope that you will have the conversations with those around you. The Trust, the palliative care team here, Fiona Gilmore and others, Gwyneth in bereavement, are really happy to support locally and to give advice and signposts where we can, but it's everybody's business, and I hope that today we all feel more equipped as we leave. So enjoy the rest of the morning. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Alison. I am so glad to hear that you took that step at the end of the last event, and that's what it's about, folks. So that's what these events are about is starting those conversations, getting people thinking about it, you know, and encouraging people and encouraging your family and your close friends to take that step and to be prepared in those small ways. And it's not easy doing, I suppose, all those things once, but even small steps make a great difference. So folks, before we move on to our first speaker, then we're going to do just a very quick pre-event, a few wee questions just to try and gauge everybody's I suppose idea around the end of life and being in a good place today. So if Anya, if we could pop up the wee poll, is that possible? Thank you, that's lovely. So if everyone please take a few seconds just even to fill in the wee pre-event survey on your thoughts and information about today would be super. And as well, folks, I see lots of people popping their names and organisations into the chat. That's brilliant because it gives us an idea as a steering group for events like this as to where everybody's coming from and maybe what we need to be working on for the next time to spread that reach even wider as well. So I'll just give you a couple of seconds. Super. That's me. My questionnaire done. That's great. Feel better now for it. So next up we have we're absolutely delighted to have Margaret Rowlandson, who is going to recite for us some of her poems about her lived experience following the death of her husband. And Margaret, we're just absolutely honoured that you have taken this opportunity to share such personal feelings and thoughts in your poetry with us following the death of your husband, and how you suppose you used poetry to process your grief.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Yep. My name's Margaret, and I'm a volunteer with Compassionate Communities Northwest. My husband, Paul, passed away in Foyle Hospice here 5 years ago. And as far as we were concerned, that was a very good place to die. He could not have received better care, and it meant a lot to my daughters and I to know that his medical and nursing needs were being so well met. It meant that we were able to spend those last few precious days just being with him. I also think it meant that Paul knew he was not putting us under any more strain than was inevitable. Although we hadn't had many specific conversations about funeral arrangements, I knew what kind of service he wanted, and I knew his favourite pieces of music. I wanted to put a few words on the front of the service sheet, and this just came to me. Love cannot heal your broken body or mend my broken heart, but it will enfold me while we are apart. I was surprised by the positive responses to those few words and felt encouraged to try and express some of my feelings in poems. I found having to face these feelings and put them into words really helped to cope with them, especially at difficult times, such as when you suddenly realize that he isn't there and that's how it's going to be. Into the vortex. Into the vortex, my thoughts a whirl. You are not there to break my fall. Then hope floods in. The warmth of love remembered is my salvation. I decided to be very patient with myself and just gradually get used to this enormous change in my life. Family, friends, and faith were all invaluable, as were the bittersweet memories. His hands. I knew every vein, every wrinkle, every hair, tender strength. The back of his wrist. I stroked soft hairs, small round bone, fingers meet. Thank you. I think that's more than enough of that for the time being. I'll hand back to you, Tim.
Margaret, thank you so much. Those words were absolutely beautiful. I'm sure I speak for everybody whenever I say that, you know, the bravery that it takes to share such personal and poignant words that, you know, are yours is just astounding. So thank you so much. Just beautiful. Thank you. So folks, after that, what we're going to have is Mr. John Wonnacott, who is the chaplain at the Macmillan unit in Antrim, and he is going to have a chat with us about the importance of being spiritually ready for dying.
That's great and fantastic. Thank you so much. And hi everybody. My name is John Wonnacott, and it's a pleasure just to be with you today. I'm just very grateful already to what Jenny has been saying, and Alison, and to Margaret, and those are really powerful nuggets that you shared. Margaret, we look forward to hearing more later on this morning. And I just want to take some time to share with you my experience of what I've learned being a chaplain with regards to spirituality and being in a good place to die spiritually. For about 20 years, I served as a Methodist minister across the island, and the church gave me permission then to go and serve as a chaplain in the Macmillan unit. And it might come as a surprise to you that in the course of this talk, I'm going to mention ice cream and elephants. So please stick with us as we look at spirituality, spiritual needs, and making plans and help with addressing spiritual needs. Okay, thank you. We'll move on. So first of all, spirituality. What is spirituality? Well, I think first and foremost, spirituality can mean all sorts of things to different people. I think very often, is it not true in our particular part of the world, when we mention spirituality, we immediately think of it in terms of organized religion. And while it can be expressed, our spirituality, in a religious way, it's first and foremost about that which gives us meaning and purpose in life. Those things that help us to cope with life and living. Spirituality can be expressed in a whole variety of ways. It can be about our relationships with others, our love of nature, the arts, sport, our beliefs, philosophy in life, religion, or faith. Our spirituality is that which is very individual, and no two people express their spirituality in exactly the same way. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Thank you. Sometimes people find it helpful to think of their spirituality in terms of having a spiritual pulse. I wonder when you first discovered that you could feel your physical pulse. I remember well the amazement when my primary school teacher showed me how I could put my fingers on my wrist and feel my physical pulse. Well, am I aware of my physical pulse every minute of the day? No, absolutely not. However, when I run up a flight of stairs or chase after the dog, then I do become more aware of my physical pulse. And so too with regards to our spiritual pulses. Sometimes it's only when we're faced with a crisis, such as maybe serious illness or getting bad news, or perhaps even coming to an event like today, we take more notice of our spiritual pulse. And such a time as this makes us aware of our spiritual needs then. Thank you. So with regards to our spiritual needs, as we reflect on our life and maybe reevaluate what it is that gives us that purpose, hope, and peace through our relationships and through nature, creativity, etc., then I say we become more aware of our spiritual needs. I don't know if you remember this woman, Baroness Tessa Joyle, and we're going to move on to the next slide. And a couple of years ago, she received a standing ovation in the House of Lords after she shared with the peers what it was to receive a diagnosis of brain cancer. And in the course of the speech, she said these very memorable words. Thank you. In the end, what gives life meaning is not how it is lived, but how it draws to a close. And her diagnosis caused her to reevaluate what was important to her. And our spiritual needs can be many and varied. If we maybe go back to that first slide, to spiritual needs, please. Thank you. They can be many, many and varied. So they can include the need to give and receive love, the need to be understood, the need to be valued as a human being, needs for forgiveness, hope and trust, the need to explore beliefs and values. And just so as our spiritual needs can change over time, our spirituality can change over time, so too our spiritual needs can change over time. And even within the course of, say, you being admitted to hospital, then your spiritual needs can change. Sometimes as a chaplain, when somebody's first admitted, people say, oh, no, I don't really need to see the chaplain, I don't really want to talk to the chaplain. But maybe in the course of their admission, maybe after they get their physical symptoms under control, they're in a better place then to think about, if you like, their own spiritual pulse, their own spiritual needs. And that can involve a whole variety of things. Maybe they want to mend a relationship. I remember somebody who was very critically ill and who was close to dying, and they had been estranged from their adult child. And this child was able to come and see them in hospital, and there actually came reconciliation through that. And that person then found themselves in a much easier place to die, having had that spiritual need met. I remember asking a woman how she had got through the night, and she says, you know, I had a really rough time. They were trying to get a cannula in, and they were struggling, John, and I cried out to God for help, and yet it still was a struggle. Where is God at this time in my life? And I think for many of us then, in terms of making plans, we prefer, as Alison's already alluded to, we prefer maybe to ignore that. And maybe go on to the slide, making plans, please. Thank you. Is it not true that for many of us, denial is not just a river in Egypt, but it's how we approach things, especially thinking about making our plans for our last wishes. And sometimes there is that hesitancy, and we avoid voicing the concerns or our wishes. But actually, as soon as we can make those wishes known, it actually frees up energy and gives us space to get on with life and living, and to face death on our own terms. I remember a man sharing with me how at the start of his illness, his son would regularly every week pick him up, and they would go and get an ice cream together. Go on to the next slide, please. So this day, his son collected him, and normally when they got to the end of the road in the car, the son would turn right. But this day the man said, no, turn left. And the son looked a bit puzzled. And the man gave his son a few more directions, and they ended up outside the local funeral directors. And the man took his son in, and he had arranged to make an appointment to see the funeral director. And they talked to the funeral director about all of the different wishes that he had. And having completed that paperwork, they got back into the car and they went for the ice cream. And the dad turned to his son as he got stuck into his 99, and he said these words, I'm at peace now. I'm at peace now, having made those plans. And for him, that was such a key item on his to-do list. With regards to his spirituality, with regards to his spiritual needs, it was like a whole burden had been lifted and he could relax. I think there is that myth that when we make our plans, that when we make our plans, it's going to somehow fast forward our death, or that we are waving the white flag of surrender. and that we've given up. Far from it. That clearly, friends, is not true. Making our plans known, maybe having honest and difficult conversations with those close to us, can bring to ourselves great peace, and it also can be the most wonderful gift to those who are close to us. There was a man who was ill, and his family were struggling to have those conversations about their last wishes. I talked to the family, and I talked to the gentleman separately, and they both had these concerns that they should have a conversation with each other, but they didn't want to upset one another. And I asked the man one day, had they been able to talk about this, as it were, this elephant in the room? And he said this to me. He said, John, we know that it has 4 legs and a trunk, and it's got 2 big ears, but we haven't yet been able to call it an elephant. A couple of days later, I went back in to chat to him further, and he said, you know, I spoke to my wife the other night, and I first said to her the flowers that I would like at my service. And, you know, it was like a stone had been taken out of that dam, that barrier between him and his family. And then the conversation flowed, and they were able to talk about all the different things that needed to be sorted through. And so to create those opportunities to share last wishes or express things which have sometimes been left unsaid can bring a real sense of peace. And sometimes the things that we need to say but struggle are things such as, I love you, I forgive you, do you forgive me, I'm sorry, goodbye. All those conversations can be so helpful. And can I say that addressing our spiritual needs can really help us in our illness, because our spiritual well-being positively impacts on our own physical and emotional health. And so I just really want to encourage you, I know Guy will probably cover some of this too, I want to encourage you to talk about your last wishes and share with others, or maybe write it down, leave it in a place where it can be found or shared. And believe you me, making those plans and making them known, it will be like you've given your family £1 million. So let's look at who can help us with our spiritual needs. So on the search for hope and meaning and peace, time and energy it takes that to have these conversations and to share what is on our mind. And it can be so helpful to have someone with us, be it a trusted friend, a spiritual leader from our own faith, or perhaps from the non-religious community, such as a humanist pastoral care, or a healthcare professional such as a GP, specialist nurse, or a chaplain. Having somebody to journey with us can be so important. And this somebody is somebody who we can feel comfortable with, someone who is willing to go at our pace and with our agenda. And with regards to chaplains, we can just share a wee bit about chaplains, because I think very often the role of the chaplain, people really wonder what is it that a chaplain does, and a chaplain is very much there to be with us in our time of need, and the chaplain is there to journey with us and also to listen to us. And as a trained listener, very often by us being able to share with a chaplain listening to us, sometimes that does a number of things. It helps ourselves to come to terms with maybe the difficulties that we're facing at this time. And as somebody once said, you know, they listened until I could hear myself. They listened until I could hear myself. They listened to the point that I began to understand what I was going through. And just in terms of listening, let me just read you a wee bit of Winnie the Pooh, and because sometimes this sums up a bit of what we do as chaplains. So Pooh says this. Pooh says, "Today was a difficult day." And there was a pause. "Do you want to talk about it?" asked Piglet. "No," said Pooh after a bit. "No, I don't think I do." "That's okay," said Piglet, and he came and sat beside his friend. "What are you doing?" asked Pooh. "Nothing really," said Piglet. "Only I know that what difficult days are like. I quite often don't feel like talking about it either on my difficult days. But goodness," continued Piglet, "difficult days are so much easier when you know you've got someone there for you, and I'll always be here for you, Pooh." And as Pooh sat there working through in his head his difficult day, while the solid, reliable Piglet sat beside him, swinging his little legs, he thought his best friend had never been more right. And as chaplains, by sitting and listening, we can help people to come to terms with what they're going through. We can also help them to rehearse what it is that they want to share with their loved ones. I think very often, particularly when we reach a critical stage of illness, when we want to voice our concerns and when we want to say that, you know, how serious we think things are, very often those around us, naturally so, they'll say, "Oh, don't worry, Granny, you'll be back home soon enough, or you'll be able to get through this. You've had a tough time recently, and soon you'll be back on your feet." Whereas the person who's ill is just longing for their loved ones to be able to say, "Yeah, we know how difficult it is, and we're going to be with you through this. And what is it that we need to address next?" And a chaplain can help people to rehearse that. And they can also very often have perhaps more time than some of the other staff, and they're also a great source of resources. And we go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this guy Henry Nouwen said this: "The person who can be silent with us in our hour of grief, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face the reality of our powerlessness, is the person that cares." And so that's who we are as chaplains. And we can also be this place of resource. Thank you. And that can be signposting to other members of the multidisciplinary team. Perhaps there's something that you've raised and you think the chaplain thinks, well, you know, actually it's the physio, or you need to really catch up with a social worker. Or maybe you've said, you know, I used to be connected to that church, but I've lost touch. And I'm sure they wouldn't want me to be anywhere near them now. I have no clue even who the minister is now. And the chaplain can go and make those inquiries. Or perhaps you've no connection to a particular religious affiliation, but actually having a humanist celebrant to help you at that particular time would be more use. And similarly, he can or she can signpost you to different resources. And so I just want to encourage you, the next time that you're in hospital and you ask, do you want to see the chaplain? Even if you have no specific religious beliefs, I encourage you to say yes and just see how you get on. So in conclusion then, friends, no matter what our definition of spirituality is, it's always good to recognize that caring for our spiritual needs is just as important as caring for, that should be our physical well-being. And next slide, please. We all need someone to listen to our fears, our desires, our hopes, and our doubts. Next slide, please. And having a trusted person or a spiritual non-religious leader with us on that journey can provide specialist pastoral support, being with us with our spiritual well-being. So thank you. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
John, thank you so much. I think that was absolutely fabulous, and give us a real insight into the role of the chaplain. And to be honest, I suppose we all thought you just drank tea all day. Is that not right, John? No. Listen, folks, I had I suppose no intention of kind of sharing anything personal today in this thing, but I suppose I feel a bit drawn after what John has said. Back in 2019, whenever we were planning for the Down Matters event, I was actually heavily pregnant that year. My due date was actually the day of the event, and I, unfortunately, whenever I went in to have my baby, they found I had a carcinoid tumour in the lung. It was only by chance actually that they found it, because I was expecting, being prepared for delivery. And I can assure you now, being expecting at 39 weeks and being given Macmillan book is not an episode I'd ever like to repeat. But I have to say, what John is saying there has just resonated with me so much, because of my involvement with the Compassionate Communities steering group and the Down Matters events, I was completely prepared, and I didn't know what was coming up. When I was in the midst of a new baby, and I ended up then, after sessions of laser therapy, I had a lobectomy last January, and I felt so prepared, and I felt at peace, because I knew that I was prepared. I had my funeral wishes, my family know them. I had everything sorted around a grave, and I felt so prepared, and that was only because of conversations that have been started at these events. So what John is saying there has just resonated so much with me, because I'm not religious in any way, but I felt at peace. Exactly what John is saying, I felt at peace because I was prepared. And I was, I wasn't spending that time, that kind of worrying time in between waiting for diagnosis, things like that, worrying about, what needed done or what needed organized, because it was all done. And I suppose I'm not saying that everybody has to have it all done, but even to take away from today, just have, try and do that one thing, as Alison said, do that one thing, and make yourself a kind of target and a goal to do that. And certainly for me, I just felt so prepared and so at peace, exactly what John has said, because I knew I had everything in that department all in hand. So thank you so much, John, that was fantastic. Folks, we're going to have a quick discussion and question and answer session now. If anybody has any questions, if you just want to kind of raise your hand, and maybe Anya, if you can unmute them, would that be okay? And I'll keep an eye on the chat as well to see if there's anything coming through. And wait till we see. So there we have one from Johnny, spoke about individual spirituality. I wonder, at the end of life, do people have similar needs or wishes?
About an hour, right.
There we are. Can you see that, John? So do people have similar needs or wishes at the end of life? Do you find, kind of, I suppose, and I don't want to say the word trends, but do you find people kind of look towards the same thing, or is there anything, is everybody individual?
It really is an individual thing, and and while we are very much encouraging folk to make preparations, I can think of individuals at both ends of those spectrum, people who maybe I would have anticipated would have had everything put in place, and all the hard conversations had from they hadn't had those conversations, and vice versa then at the other end of the spectrum. So I think it's really important that people don't feel under pressure. Oh, I've got to this is how I've got to feel at this particular time. That it is very much an individual journey. Does that help the person, or do you want me to share some more?
Oh, super, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Fiona, you had your hand raised there.
Yeah, I just want to ask John, could you tell us just maybe a wee bit about your experience during this past year, obviously with the pandemic? What has your experience of that been? Really, what has the challenges that you have encountered you know, from a patient or staff perspective, and really, I suppose, then what learning have you gleaned from that that we could take forward? So sorry, 2 or 3 questions in one.
No, those are really, really, really important questions, and I do think that, as we've talked about it, you know, people have said, you know, we're all in the same storm in different boats, and I think it probably is only going to be in the next months and years that we'll fully appreciate the storm that we've been in. But certainly that separation that those who are ill, those patients from their families, you know, it's just been such a difficult foreign place for people to be in, either to have been in hospital and then to have gone home, or indeed for those then whose loved ones have died in hospital and they haven't had opportunities to be with their loved one, to say goodbye to their loved one. That has been very difficult. You know, all our familiar landmarks and milestones of bereavement, many of those have been removed, and that has undoubtedly been a struggle. And I suppose one of the things that I would just say, Fiona, is that if we're finding ourselves in a difficult place, and be somebody who's ill or a loved one or staff, that's I think everybody, all of us are finding ourselves in difficult places. And that's, you know, sometimes prior to COVID, you know, somebody would say in the room, oh, I'm finding this really, really tough. And somebody would say, oh, you know, I'm not doing too bad actually, you know, or, you know, we're going to be okay, or we'll get through this. Everybody will find themselves in the same place. And to say that you're not feeling okay, that is very much okay to say that. In terms of staff, it's been a hugely difficult time, because a lot of the familiar things, be it that opportunity to touch, or to hold a patient's hand, or to be with people, and at such a critical time, a lot of those things were made very hard in COVID. And so one of the things that I'll never forget is that at the height of COVID, we would give out these little wooden hearts, or for those for whom it was appropriate, it might be a little holding cross. These little hearts, they just sit in the palm of your hand. And staff actually took these wooden hearts then and invited loved ones to give a message, which was written on the heart and then given to the patient to hold on to, as a tangible reminder of how they were very much held in the hearts of their loved ones, and indeed of the team. So I do believe that, and I think hopefully there is a lot of awareness of this at the moment, that we're just going to have to be very gentle on ourselves, you know, as we go forward, and recognize that there is going to be an impact of this time that we'll only really begin to come to terms with in these next months and years. Does that help you?
Yeah, I suppose are there any, you know, is there any learning that you think, well, look, we did this differently and that's something that should be carried on, or not to put you on the spot or anything?
No, that's very helpful, Fiona. I do think there's become a greater awareness. I hope there's become a greater awareness of the need to care for each other and ourselves. And I think that's, you know, saying that we're not okay, that is okay. I'm hoping that we've become much more in tune with that. And it's not just the case, I think particularly as staff, you know, we maybe just would have ploughed on through it in the past and just buried it. But hopefully there will be those resources and that greater awareness that we just really do need to take care of our own emotional and indeed our spiritual needs, be it staff or patients and loved ones.
Yeah, and our communities, I suppose, you know, be
And-
very aware of the wider community. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Lovely, John. Thank you so much. That's fab. There's some comments in the chat just about how people love the quote, which was fantastic. And also people just saying about how, you know, they agree that we don't really know the impact yet of COVID. And wait till we see, there is someone wanting to speak. I'm not sure of your name. It says Quizzer. The gentleman. Go on ahead.
Yeah, if you can just come off mute there, if you wouldn't mind.
I'm off mute now, yes?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Sorry, first of all, yes, I've got a very Irish name, Quizzer, and little bit like John. I'm not too confident, and I don't know how to change it, but it's a little bit more straightforward, as in Hugh Black from Ballymena. But so someday I'll learn how to change Quizzer to Hugh Black. John, just wanted to ask, how do you deal with people, and I've no doubt you come across them, people who have Christian beliefs or non-Christian beliefs?
Yeah, I hope I'm answering this, Hugh, and just we very much as chaplains, we are trained to be with folk and meet with them wherever they are at, and journey with them in whatever direction that is. So sometimes people maybe want to explore their Christian beliefs. Sometimes people will have no Christian beliefs, and we're not there to impose our agendas. We're simply there as chaplains to listen and to journey with the person. Sometimes people then they'll come from a particular Christian belief, and they'll maybe want their own minister or perhaps another chaplain, another denomination, and we'll signpost them on to them. Hugh.
No, yeah.
I think there's always a danger, Hugh, that and sometimes staff will be asked this by patients, say, we're glad to get John the chaplain, and the first question is he going to come and preach at me? and if a chaplain ever preaches at you, then they need to have a quiet word with them. So.
Thank you, John. There's a wee question in there. I suppose someone has said both parents are fairly religious and have put their faith in Christianity, have their service and funeral planned for. My question is, how do you plan for a service if you're a spiritual individual but not religious in any way and don't identify so much with above? So really this person, I suppose, maybe doesn't share the same religious beliefs as their parents, and they're wondering how can I best plan for that whenever the time comes.
So Jenny, did I pick you up right that the person wouldn't maybe come from a religious perspective? Yeah. So with there are folk within the Humanist Society, there are.
Oh, sorry, John. Maybe I come across wrong. The parents are religious, but the person,
yes.
the child, the person isn't religious, and they're wondering how will they plan. How will they go through with their parents' plans if they're not religious themselves.
I got you. Well, hopefully his or her parents are still connected to a church, and I would encourage them. Then hopefully then the minister, the pastor, the priest of that church will be able to guide them through the plans. And
apologies, John, can I just interrupt? It was me that put the question out. No, it's not that.
Right.
My both parents are very religious, and church goers. They have their service, their funeral and everything all planned.
Yes.
It's just I don't maybe identify the same as my parents, and I'm not concerned their funeral will go ahead as they have wished. Their wishes will be carried out. I suppose I'm thinking about, how do I plan for my service if maybe I don't identify so much with their beliefs.
Fantastic. Yes, sorry. Thanks for the clarification. Either through the web, I don't want to I'm not trying to put you in any sort of box or whatever, but within Northern Ireland, there are humanist celebrants, and they are fantastic at helping people who don't come from a religious background to help you plan and make suggestions for your service. They would meet up with you, and you share, something of your own, what it is that gives you meaning and purpose, and something of your life, and how you would like to have that service or time of celebration, or after your death, and they could walk you through that, and either through the Humanist Society, I hope I'm giving that right title, or indeed, your local undertaker should be in a place where they could signpost you to a local humanist. If you don't mind sharing with the people your details, I'd happily talk to you further after this, if that's any help to you as well.
I would be, I would consider myself as very spiritual. I would be very, very spiritual, but I'm not very religious in the Christianity.
Aye, totally. Well, they would be glad to talk to you in those terms, and indeed, I think that's probably your best, or indeed, if you're not particularly attached to any local church, again, through your local undertaker, you might find that they have somebody who would be able to put together a service for you that, I suppose it really depends. We always try to make services as individual as possible, whether you want what particular music you want, or if you want particular readings or poems or prayers, or I think it's really important that you do it in a way that's personal and individual to you. But glad to talk further if that's of any, if you'd like to talk further.
Thank you so much, John.
Super, thank you, John. Just a couple more wee quick questions. There's one in the chat here. How do you deal with a sudden death spiritually if sometimes there are no answers?
Yeah, no, and I think it's really to try to suggest answers is a really, really cruel thing, and that is the truth. So sometimes there isn't answers, and particularly in the case of a sudden death. And I suppose, again, I just encourage you, it's the old African proverb where we go quicker on our own, but we go further together. And again, if that's been folks' experience, either through local bereavement services, I would just encourage people to reach out to support there where there is for people to journey with them, either if you're from a local church, or indeed the counselling services that are available. I appreciate there can be really difficult waiting lists, but I really encourage you to reach out. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Another wee one there, John. And how should I respond if a person asks, am I dying? Is there any way to make that as easy as possible?
I think that's a really powerful question. And if that person, so I think that person would be on one of two tracks. They'll either feel like they're dying, but they're actually going to be, all things considered, through their treatment, they will come through it, or they actually feel in their own body that they are dying, and that is where they're at. And I think the greatest thing we can do is to ask that person, what is it that makes you feel? What is it that makes you say that? And if they open up further, and that is how they feel, and they think that they're in the middle of dying, back to what I said before, rather than saying, oh, catch yourself on, or you're going to be okay, or say, well, maybe you are, as Catherine Mannix is a great person to listen to. And she says, you know, sometimes we are sick enough we're in a place that we're sick enough to die. And to actually name that for the person can be such a help rather than trying to hide them from that truth. If we try to protect people, we really aren't going to protect them if those are the questions that they're asking and if that's the place that they're in my opinion.
Lovely, thank you, John. And there was a final one there, but I think someone has answered it anyway about the 4 or 5 things to think about when you're talking to a loved one. Somebody's put, I think Gwyneth has answered it, so there, I love you, I forgive you. Gwyneth has answered it, thank you. And again, there's no more questions, just some comments in the chat really about people's experiences, some experiences of death in hospital, some experiences of humanist funerals, which is lovely. So please have a look at those folks as well in the chat. John, thank you so much. That was absolutely fabulous. And I say, just everything you said just resonated so much with me. You know, so I just think it's so important, and the role of the chaplain is so important in the hospital. And you know, especially during COVID. I'm sure John, you'll be looking for a good holiday and a good time off when this is all over. I would imagine you've probably been very, very busy the past year. So thank you so much. That's fab. Folks, we are going to have a comfort break, but just before that, we have a video to share with you. Now, unfortunately, we had a solicitor lined up, but due to unforeseen circumstances, they're not able to make it today. So we're going to pop this video on. It is the Dying Matters video, and it's going to give us some good information and hints and tips about being in a good place today.
Dad? 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 Granddad, are you okay? Dad! Dad, you frightened me, Dad! Dad!
Your granddad needs to go to hospital.
But why?
Oh, sweetheart, look at him.
Don't.
Don't what?
I'm not having a go. I'm just saying, why can't he stay here where they can send experts to look after him? At least then he's surrounded by people that love him. You know him. He's your dad.
I do know him. I know exactly what he wants, and he doesn't want this.
What would you do?
Never mind what I do. This isn't about me. I know what he wants, and you don't. He's going to hospital, and that is that.
I'm so sorry this has happened. I know you wanted what was best for me, but I didn't want that.
My brother's talked a lot about you. He's got very fond memories of you both growing up. Now, David, your brother is very poorly. And he's reached the stage where I'm afraid we can do no more to actively treat his cancer. What we can do is keep him comfortable and pain-free. I know this might be difficult, but did your brother ever talk to you about resuscitation?
Okay, we've got Gareth, hypertensive, found collapsed at home, pulse rate 120. We just realised he stopped breathing.
Well, at this stage, cardiopulmonary resuscitation would not ultimately be successful.
Gareth? Gareth?
I don't think resuscitation would be of any benefit to your brother at all. What are your feelings about that?
He's too young to die. I want you to do everything you can. Get some pads on. This is a good BS. I'll charge you. Carry on with chest compressions. Everybody else stand clear. Please don't let him die. Stand clear. Shot
I know why you did it. That really hurt. I didn't want that.
Get all this stuff loaded up.
No, it's fine. It's yours. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, mind for ducks.
No.
I'll tell you what, they're nice then.
Nice to get down at the pub. What time's the next job?
An hour. All right.
We've got an hour.
We're good. All right, don't know about too much, will you? You all right, love?
I wanted her to be looked after. I didn't want that.
I might be gay, but I'm not a stereotype. I didn't want that.
You getting up? Six. Oh! Aye!
He was all I had. I wanted him to be looked after. I didn't want that.
I do know him. I know exactly what he wants.
Slightly shocking.
If there are things you don't want, as well as things you do, you need to make plans. Dying matters.
Thank you. Folks, that was very poignant and I hope it has given us food for thought. A very emotive video. And I suppose it kind of goes back to what John was saying about, you know, yes, it's our responsibility to talk about our wishes, but it's also our responsibility to let people speak and to let people give them that opportunity. If someone does raise the conversation with us, it's about not brushing it off and saying, oh no, it'll be fine, don't worry, don't be talking about that. It's about saying, yep, I'm here, I'm listening, and I'm here for as long as you need me to be to listen and to record your wishes. So very, very emotive and gives us all kind of tips for what we can think about and planning for the end. Folks, we'll take a wee comfort break now. If everyone is happy, we'll maybe return about 15:15, so 11:15. And once we come back, we'll be having Mr. Gary Hare, President of the National Association of Funeral Directors, with us to speak. So thank you. So about 15 minutes, folks, about 15:15 if we come back. Thank you. We still have some fantastic speakers coming up. I just wanted to, before we move on to Gary, I just wanted to point out, I suppose there's a wee comment there in the chat that someone said working with John in the Macmillan unit and has really inspired this person to say, how are you to staff and colleagues? And just, I suppose, highlighting how powerful a question that is. So thank you very much to Helen. Folks, we're going to move on now. We're going to have a chat now with Mr. Gary Hare, who is president of the National Association of Funeral Directors, and is here on behalf of S. Clark and Son Funeral Directors. And he's going to have a chat with us about being prepared.
Thanks, Jenny. I take it everybody can hear me. That's good.
Yeah.
If just for a moment, we've all been sitting for the last little while. I know you've got to have a comfort bed. If you just put your arms out behind you and give them a bit of a shake, and then bring them forward again and give them a bit of a shake, just do it and do that back again, and then back in again. Now, the reason behind that is that way back in the 1940s, there was a gentleman called John Hokey who invented the hokey cokey. And that's part of the movements that we do and know about. And at his funeral, over 10,000 people turned up because he was well known all throughout the province. But that's when the problem happened, when they started to coffin him, because they put his right leg in, and then you can figure it out for yourselves after that. Along the way. Being prepared is one of the key things that we try to, funeral directors, you may be aware, are not actually sad people. We actually do have a sense of humor, and a very bad sense of humor, which I think probably comes from my previous life, having been involved in healthcare for a number of years. I chaired the Association of Christian Counsellors. I've been minister for 20 years before I've come into funeral directing. So I've got a quite wide range. And whilst I may talk about this on a daily basis as people come across me, this is also very personal to me, because in the last 2 weeks, I've had the privilege of conducting my own mum's funeral. I had a nephew yesterday whose child was stillborn at 35 weeks. They conducted their service. And sadly, last week, we also had to let go of our dog of 10 years, who's a family dog. So we've had quite a lot of things in depth. But mum's service was so easy because we actually talked about this about 2014. And we had all the things in place, and we knew exactly what she wanted because she was prepared. I suppose it's a bit like the gentleman who was, knowing he was terminally ill, and was, I suppose, lying in his deathbed as such. And suddenly up the stairs came this wonderful smell of chocolate chip cookies, his favorite. And he thought, oh, my dear wife is actually baking me something for my last time here. But he got up out of bed, struggled as he could, not breathing very well, made his way down the stairs, came into the kitchen and saw this whole platter of chocolate chip cookies there. And as he reached out to lift one, suddenly his wife lifted the nearest spatula and whacked his hand and said, stop that, that's for the funeral, go away. Which is some of the things that would happen here, I suppose, in our part of the world. Being prepared is important, and in terms of, you'll see 2 slides that come up as a document that's called Dying Matters, My Funeral Wishes. It's actually talking through, because one of the things we need to do is to think through what my funeral wishes are. And that's where your local funeral director can be very, very important to you, one who's part of the professional organizations around. And you can sit down with them at any time and talk through, well, what are my wishes? Do I have a particular theme I want to do? Does it have to be a religious service or a non-religious service? That is a choice that we will take all into consideration as we come along. And a part of that is actually sitting down and thinking, what are my wishes? The key thing about this is making sure that it's with a reputable company. You'll see a lot of things on television popping up. Talking to your local funeral director means you have a personal face to actually talk to. And you can go back and change things as you go along, because within any funeral, there are 2 parts of it. Number 1 is a bit that's called the professional services, and then things that are called third party. And both of those elements are elements of the cost that will come into play when you come to do that for a funeral. So for example, do you know what type of coffin you want? Do you want an eco-friendly one, a green service along the way? Will I have just a hearse, as we've had to do over these past year because of COVID, rather than having a limousine to help me get to and from the various venues that I have to get to? What are those costs, and talking through it? Do I want to have a burial service? Where's that going to happen? Is it my local churchyard? Is it one of the council cemeteries? Is it one of the green cemeteries that are now available? Or am I going for cremation? Because again, that is something that all has a cost affected to it. And all of those things should be involved in it, including what type of flowers I have. I had very strict instructions on my mum's. She wanted no daisies and no lilies, both of which made her sneeze. And therefore, we didn't have those in her particular coffin spray. Not that she was going to be there, but she was just concerned with the rest of the sneezing during the service as it sat at the front there. Again, do we want a traditional service, a non-faith humanist celebrants actually taking the service? And part of the thing, certainly from a funeral director's perspective, is making sure we have the right paperwork. In other words, if you have a grave, have you found your grave lease? Because we need to supply that to whoever's actually carrying out the excavation for the funeral to do that. Are you looking for your local church minister? Is it a previous minister or friend or family friend who, again, how do you get in contact with them? Do you have it? And that can all be recorded within your wishes so that when the time happens, the funeral director, once you've contacted him, can start that process of ensuring things are there along the way. The order of service. I mean, Mum had very strict instructions. Don't you dare put a photograph of me on the front of that order of service. I don't want people gawking at me as they were here, as it said, in this part of the world. And that was perfectly okay. So we didn't do that. We put a picture of her dad on the front of it. So that just was our being very naughty at the time and to do that. And again, you don't necessarily have to put a notice in the paper nowadays. You can also use Funeral Times or RIP.ie. Again, there's different online services that can be used to put up the notice. Again, is there no flowers, but just the family flowers and going to a particular charity? That can all be recorded down for you with your funeral director, and we will execute that on your place. Do you want people to see you after your death or not? That's again something you can do it. And your coffins can be wood, can be willow, can be coloured, can be and because over the last year, because of COVID, many funeral services have had to be live streamed, which has helped families who couldn't move out of areas. And I think that's one of the biggest difficulties we have found within the profession, is where we would normally say yes to somebody, we've had to come back and say no. We can't do that. And that's been very, very difficult, not only for families and bereaved families, but also for us as FDs, because we are human after all. People may not think that, but we are. And it does get you when you have to keep saying to families, sorry, along the way. One of the other things to think about as you go through that is, do you want people to wear a particular style of clothing? Certainly at a recent funeral, which I conducted, was of a young person, and their favorite color was pink. So everybody had to wear pink ties, including my funeral colleague staff. Not a normally becoming look on funeral directors wearing pink, but that's the way it is. I just told them to get in contact with their feminine side, which they had to do, and they just had to get there along the way. And again, even at that, if I'm going from a particular church or from home, which again we haven't been able to do for many times, do we take a particular route for you to stop and pause as we go along? That would be very, very useful for folks. And obviously at the moment we still cannot have refreshments, but hopefully that's going to change, where you can go and celebrate with family and friends after it. And maybe they'll even say to us tomorrow that we can hug each other. I'm a hugger. I love hugging people, but that's just me. Not everybody likes that, because most people just go, don't touch me. It's not going to help me here at all as we're going along. And again, what happens if I'm going for cremation? Do I have a particular urn to be used, or maybe a scatter tube to scatter the person later on? And most people don't actually know that. One of the key things around all of this, that even when the event is over, you still have the ability of making your wishes known of what phrases or things you want to put on a headstone or get a memorial happen along the way. Obviously, your executor is the person who has to look after those things when the time comes. Unfortunately, if you even had an EPA in place, and I hope my legal colleagues might have dealt with that, that ceases when the person dies, unfortunately, and therefore it goes to the executor, who carries out the wishes of what they want to do. And obviously, we're going to hear from our next speaker about digital passwords and all the rest of it. And what's going to happen to your Facebook account or Twitter or LinkedIn account once you have gone? Who has going to close that down? And hopefully Elaine will deal with that. I know she will deal with that in her talk along the way. But part of it is just being able to sit down with somebody and saying, this is what it is. This is what I would like. And that's where your local funeral director is very much able to help you talk through those sorts of things. There was a group of ladies who were out and they were playing golf on this particular occasion, and they were just about to chip into the final green, and suddenly one of them stopped, took off her hat, bowed her head in prayer, and stood there as she saw this funeral procession passing the golf course. And her colleague said to her, you're a really kind person doing that. I've never seen anybody do that before, and really, really appreciate it. She said, well, yes, we were married for 35 years, so I better do something about it at this particular time, which is not unusual along the way. I'm quite happy to take questions at the end and to come back. There's a whole lot of stuff I could say, I don't need to say, but I'll finish with this story about Barry and Hannah, who were an elderly couple watching the television program, a bit like us today, which is a bit surreal, talking about what to do with the case of death and wills and funeral plans, and putting your affairs in order. And Barry turned to his wife and said, honey, in a rather serious expression, I want you to promise me that if it ever comes to a time that I'm dependent on just machines or fluids, that you'll sure put an end to it so I don't have to go through all of that. To which Hannah replied and said, that's perfectly okay, honey, and promptly got up, turned off the TV and poured all his beer down the sink. So it's one of those things. We're not scary funeral directors. Do come and talk to us, and we're more than happy to take questions when we get to that. And back to you, Jenny, for sharing this.
Gary, I'm actually happy to share your leaflet here if you want
to show it up. You can download it from the Down Matters website. It's there, but there's a lot more detail you would go into if you are going to see it. This is the second page, talking about where they want it, all those things, and people can see that. That's quite as I say. The Down Matter website does have that on it. You can download it afterwards and use it as an aid memoir if you want to go and talk with your funeral director, as I say. So good to be with you this morning. Happy to take questions at the end, and back to yourself, Jenny.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Gary. And I suppose just to say as well, for anybody that maybe doesn't have access to a computer to download or whatever, please feel free to give me a ring, and maybe some of my colleagues there will pop the telephone number into the chat. Give us a wee ring and we'd certainly be happy to provide that leaflet to post out for anybody that needs it. So thank you. Gary, we're going to have a lovely pre-recording now from Dr. Leanne Casket, who is with us, but she's done a wee pre-recording, and then we're going to do your questions all together for both speakers. So, all right, this up next is really, really interesting. We have Dr. Leanne Casket on how and why everyone needs to prepare for their digital afterlife. I think this is so relevant and so key at the moment.
I'm Elaine Casket, psychologist and author of All the Ghosts in the Machine, the digital afterlife of your personal data. And I'm going to talk about why everyone needs to prepare for their digital afterlife. Digital afterlives are the zeros and ones we leave behind when we die. They might be called digital footprints, digital legacies, digital assets, or digital remains. And they're not just made up of social media posts. Even if you hate Facebook, you're indifferent to Twitter, and you're clueless about Instagram, you're still leaving behind a breadcrumb trail of digital detritus throughout your life that doesn't just disappear when you die. And this isn't like Hansel and Gretel's deliberate breadcrumb trail. This is the trail that you create unintentionally, incidentally, as you wander through the deep, wide forest of modern digital life. What are some of the breadcrumbs that you drop as you go? I'll tell you about 3. Breadcrumb 1, your emails and private messages. In 2004, an American soldier was killed in Iraq. His email providers, T's and C's, stipulated deletion of account contents upon death, but the soldier's father took the provider to court, saying he needed some specific information for the estate. Yahoo didn't go down without a fight, but the father ended up getting what he wanted: 3 boxes and 10,000 pages of material on a CD. Everything was there, a comprehensive collection of correspondence between his deceased son and loads of people that the father had never heard of, many of them presumably still living users. These users had every right to expect privacy from the email provider that they'd also signed up to, but nevertheless, this bereaved father was now free to read their complete email history with his late son. Perhaps you feel comfortable giving a trusted person carte blanche access to all of your correspondence. Perhaps you don't. But one thing's certain, it's not only your privacy at stake, but the privacy of everyone you communicated with. Another kind of breadcrumb: if you use the internet, you generally leave behind search histories. In 2006, a data leak resulted in the publication of the search histories of 650,000 AOL users. And despite these search strings being anonymized, the New York Times was able to identify several individuals. A couple of years later, a couple of filmmakers created I Love Alaska, a series of mini-movies based upon one person's search history. Perhaps it's difficult to imagine why a search history could provide a significantly compelling narrative to form the basis of a film, but give it a chance. Searcher 711391 was a middle-aged married woman from Texas. Friday: how to make good impression meeting an online friend. Saturday: what is a womanizer? Can you use prepaid phone cards on cell phones? Sunday: how to get rid of nervousness meeting a blind date. How can you tell if someone online is lying? Monday: symptoms of heart attack, trapped gas in chest, never admit to an extramarital affair. If it had been her grieving husband that had seen her search history after her death, what might he have realized about his late wife that he didn't know before? And if your loved ones had access to every search you'd ever made, what would they learn about you? A final kind of breadcrumb I'll mention is your location data. The location settings on our phones and wearable devices have the capacity, if they're enabled or not disabled, to track everywhere we've ever been, and those data are easily combined with other digitally captured time and date stamped data. In situations where the relationship was troubled or where the death was complicated or mysterious, a bereaved person's hunt for answers to persistent questions can potentially send them into a spiral of compulsive digital detective work. Has there ever been a time when you weren't where you said you were? Maybe it was entirely innocent, maybe it wasn't, but what might it be like for someone you love to be wrestling with that question after you're gone? So whether you're on social media or not, your digital being is more comprehensive than you think. What do I mean by digital being? As a psychologist, I think in terms of external behavior and internal behavior. External behavior is anything you could be filmed doing: typing out a message on your phone, posting something on Facebook, writing an email, performing a search, giving a talk. This is the being of body. Internal behavior includes your thoughts and your feelings. It's inside the skin, the being of mind. It's not socially performative. On its own, it's invisible to others. But our digital being is somewhere in between. It shows a mixture of the external and the internal. And taken in aggregate, our digital remains are often more like digital beings than mere digital footprints, because they're capable of capturing the inner workings of the mind, the struggles of the heart, the dark night of the soul. And that's why digital remains can be so meaningful. They can show you the person you knew, and they can show you the person you didn't. Maybe you're wondering whether it's healthy to continue to visit someone's social media profiles after they're dead. Maybe you're wondering if it's a problem. But remember this: forget what you've heard about the stages of grief. Grief is different for everyone, and we're not doing ourselves any favors when we try to analyze whether we're mourning in the right way. Across cultures and millennia, human beings have continued bonds with the dead. Your relationship with a person changes when they die, but it doesn't end. And just as every relationship is unique, so is each bereavement. There are many forms of continuing bonds, and we humans have always used the communication technologies of the day to try and contact the dead. When the telegraph tapped, the spirits rapped. And when photography came around, so did spook pictures. Thomas Edison hoped that the phonograph would be able to capture the voices of the dead from the Great War. Now it can be much easier to continue bonds because the dead, or at least their persistent digital beings, live in the tech already. We may be able to access quite a lot of information about the deceased, for good or ill. Particularly in the immediate period after death, people often experience a searching and calling reflex, looking for the dead in the same places and spaces where they were last seen. These days, those places are often online. If you search for the dead online soon after they're gone, you'll find them. The online space is meaningful to and practical for the living as both a home for and a conduit to their dead. But the online dead need caretakers. The word legacy comes from the medieval Latin word legatus, someone who's appointed, someone who's delegated. Who's delegated to look after the digitally persistent dead? Their next of kin, the representatives of their estates or their executors? Or when we sign up to a platform or service, are we simultaneously engaging that company to manage our personal data when we're dead? We don't mean to do that, but is that by default what is happening? When most of our information and memorabilia are digitally stored, bereaved families have issues with access and issues with control. The family used to have privileged access to the effects of the deceased, but the social networking era is the era of the friend. Friends used to be disenfranchised mourners, the outer circle of the bereaved. But friends may now have more access to the deceased person's words and images than family members. It's also the age of corporate control of our information. Imagine that you lost someone extremely important to you, and that the entire record of your long-time relationship was contained in a physical shoebox. A shoebox full of photos, notes, letters, and other ephemera. After their death, you keep this shoebox by your bed, where you can go through it whenever you want, whenever you need to feel a connection with the person that you lost. One day, some months after the death, there's a knock at your door. You open it, and you're met with a stranger on your doorstep. This person silently brushes past you into your home, walks down the corridor and into your bedroom. They grab your shoebox and leave. Your entire record of their relationship with this person is abruptly gone. It's like a second death. Eventually, you identify who this person was, but your pleas for the return of your precious memorabilia fall on deaf ears. The shoebox was never really yours to begin with, you're told. If this were a real shoebox in your actual house, several crimes would have been committed here. But when your memories are entrusted to big tech, this can easily happen. Your shoebox of memories can disappear, and it will all be perfectly legal. Bereaved people can sometimes encounter emotional difficulties because they can access too much digitally stored information about their loved ones, and sometimes there are issues with having too little. Facebook is a significant steward of deceased people's data. There are such things as digital legacy services, which are designed for the express purposes of preservation of memories and memorialization of the dead, but these come and go, and they're minnows next to the gigantic blue whale of a platform that never set out to be a digital cemetery in the first place. Researchers at the Oxford Internet Institute have calculated that Facebook could host the digital remains of 4.9 billion people by the end of the century. Facebook recognizes that digital remains on its site are extremely important to many mourners. A while back, I talked to one of the main forces behind memorialization at Facebook, who compared Facebook's role to that of a funeral director. Who would have predicted that Facebook would come to see itself as the funeral director of our online digital remains? But technology companies' control over our personal data often doesn't lessen when we die. It increases. They can decide how we will be remembered online and by whom. Believe it or not, A large percentage of the services we use don't have anything in their terms and conditions about what happens to our data when we die. In most places, the law has yet to keep up with technology. So, for now, it's largely up to you. What can you do to prepare for your digital afterlife? Confront your death anxiety. Facing up to your eventual demise can be a struggle, understandably. Death is the great mystery, the ultimate loss of control, the unfathomable snuffing out of the conscious existence you've always known. And you may tend to avoid the things that make you anxious, but avoidance can maintain and fuel anxiety. Take a deep breath and look your finitude square in the face, and you may find that you can bend this awareness to your advantage. Occasionally remind yourself that each time you use a connected device, you may be laying down another brick on your eventual digital monument, writing another paragraph in a digital autobiography that will outlive you. If you see digital activity as not just the stuff of life, but as the stuff of legacy, you'll probably make smarter decisions. If you died tomorrow, would you be content with what's left behind? Would you be happy with the words that hover in the ether, with the image that lingers in your digital reflection? If not, what do you want to do differently, online and off? Always assess, never assume. This rule applies whether you're planning for your own digital legacy or managing someone else's. Remember that what was true in the pre-digital era may not and often does not apply in digital contexts. For all of the online accounts that matter to you, look for the terms and conditions that explain what happens to your data when you die. If you can't find any, inquire. Maybe your questions will spark some change where it's much needed. Get education and advice and guidance from online organizations that educate the public about digital legacy. In the UK, the Digital Legacy Association is one of these. And if you're choosing a probate specialist, try to find one who's knowledgeable about digital legacy and digital assets. Put yourself in other people's shoes. If you're logged on to, or managing, or even actively operating a deceased person's phone, social media accounts, blog, message apps, or email accounts, it's very important to realize that any activity from within these accounts can result in voice from beyond the grave phenomena for others. You'll also be accessing data associated with still living persons, which might certainly concern them and which on reflection might also concern you. Maybe you don't care what happens after you die, so you don't concern yourself with your digital remains. Maybe you want your online presence deleted after you draw your last breath, and that's your prerogative. Before you make any decisions, though, see it from the other person's perspective. If someone dear to you had a rich online presence, replete with photos, videos, and other memorabilia, a digital shoebox of memories, would it bother you if all that material disappeared after their death? Let that sink in, really sink in, and you may suddenly feel less devil-may-care about your own digital legacy. Using your imagination only takes you so far, so you may be making erroneous assumptions about how others would feel. And that brings us to the fourth tip. Have conversations about death and the digital. Talk about it. Talk about it because it's an intellectually interesting topic, by all means, but don't keep it in the abstract. Meaningfully apply it to your own life. Speak to the people you love about how you feel about your digital material, about your personal take on privacy and ownership of data in the digital era. Talk about what you'd like to happen with your data when you're no longer here, if you can control it. Ask them about their thoughts and preferences regarding their own digital information. If your friend or family member says she wants all of her social media deleted on death and she's planning on instructing legacy contact settings to that effect, and if you think it would break your heart to lose it, tell her so, while also trying to understand where she's coming from. If she sticks to her guns, think about how you might preserve anything that's precious to you. If it's important to you to have your Facebook profile memorialized or your blog maintained for posterity, make that clear to your next of kin who may otherwise have had no idea. If you're not sure how you feel, talking it through with others will probably clarify your position. Now, furthermore, don't just have conversations about it in the social or the family realm. Think about your workplace if you have one. Does your employer control or process the data of employees, clients, users, customers? Probably yes. Could any of that information be of practical or financial or sentimental value to anyone else if the persons associated with the data were to die? Probably yes. Does your organization have well-articulated policies and procedures around what to do with the data of the deceased, or clear guidance and training on how to respond to bereaved family members? The answers to those questions might very well be no, because we still have a long way to go in this area. Lead the change by speaking up. Make a digital era will. First, buck the trend by making a will in the first place, and then flout convention even further by explicitly recording your wishes, preferences, hopes for digitally stored material. Ironically, this thoroughly modern last will and testament may need to be on paper, signed in ink, and officially witnessed, because not all jurisdictions recognize digitally generated and stored wills, so check the law in your area. But even if digital things aren't legally executable where you live, it never hurts to be clear about what you'd like or what you'd want. For example, I would like my mother to use money from my estate to keep up payments on my blog, for example, or I want my Facebook profile to be memorialized. In the absence of a clear steer from you, your loved ones and the corporations that manage your data will make inferences or just follow T's and C's and potentially argue amongst themselves about what you really would have wanted. And maybe they'll get that right, maybe they won't. On every account that allows you to do so, nominate a kind of digital executor, which is legacy contact on Facebook and an active account manager on Google. And remember, lots of platforms, if not most platforms, still don't have terms and conditions governing what happens to your data when you die. But if you nominate a kind of digital executor, make sure you've discussed that with the person first. Again, it might not hold legal weight where you live yet, but all of this is far better than giving no indication at all of your desires. Repeat yourself in your official will or in a letter kept with your official will, remembering though that you can't bequeath what you don't own. You don't own a lot of the stuff that you keep on third-party providers' platforms, and you might not be allowed to transfer control of your account or certainly give access to its contents to another individual. It's usually a one account, one user, cannot access except by the user situation. So manage your expectations by always checking those T's and C's. Don't rely on passwords. Assume that if an account or device is password protected, it likely won't be accessible after your death. Apple or Facebook or Amazon will not give people other than the account holder access. Password protecting your devices, accounts, and apps is absolutely necessary to maintain your data security and privacy in life, and we're encouraged to change them frequently or when there's been a breach. After a death, these eminently sensible safeguards can become a nightmare for those who need to settle your estate or access personal memorabilia. Even though in many jurisdictions this hack is illegal or the contracts forbid it, some folks have tried to plan ahead by providing another person or persons with passwords to their devices or accounts. If someone allows you, in case of death or emergency, access to their devices and their account passwords, don't abuse their trust by snooping. For the sake of whatever relationship you have, be clear between yourselves about the circumstances under which it's permissible to access the other person's private data. But remember that account passwords will have a shelf life, and terms and conditions might stipulate account deletion, memorialization, or some other type of login lockdown upon the confirmed death of the original account holder. Now, if you have skeletons in your digital closet that you suspect would cause confusion, feelings of betrayal, or additional pain to people you care about, be careful about granting those individuals carte blanche access. If you're unwilling to confess and address any lurking secrets while you're still alive, you might wish to embark on a deleting frenzy, let the passwords die with you, or otherwise ensure that the closet door remains shut when you're no longer able to guard it. In some circumstances, including ones where you won't be around to pick up the pieces, there's an argument for allowing your dear ones to remain blissful in their ignorance. Be an unapologetic curator. Imagine inheriting the laptop or other storage devices of someone who took a lot of photographs. Naturally, because of the ubiquity of in-phone cameras, this describes a lot of people. You'd be confronted with thousands of images. Beyond those files, there might be thousands of other types of files, documents, emails, text messages, most of them without any context or comment to indicate what's meaningful or important and what's not. Many bereaved people find themselves so staggered by the huge, undifferentiated mass of a loved one's digital stuff that they can't see the wood for the trees and avoid engaging with it. An ardent genealogist of today may go into raptures when they discover a single photograph of their great-great-great-grandfather from a time when photographic images were rare rather than abundant. If all of today's digitally stored data do manage to be persistent and accessible over the next centuries, amateur genealogists will find a once challenging hobby about as exciting as shooting fish in a barrel. But when it comes to our digital information, most of us are hoarders. Clean your digital house frequently and be careful about how much you store in the first place. This tip is for when you are bereaved rather than when you're preparing for your own digital afterlife. Accessing more doesn't always equate to feeling better. In grief, it is common to search for the lost loved one and to hungrily fall upon anything associated with them, particularly perhaps in the case of difficult deaths that were unexpected or traumatic, or that involved suicide, homicide, or mystery. This searching can assume the form of combing through the deceased's data in a relentless quest for answers, comfort, and resolution. I'm sure that in some circumstances, going through private correspondence can be helpful to some mourners. Sometimes, however, the searcher will encounter material that's frustratingly ambiguous, or that only provokes more questions. The dead person is no longer there to answer unsettling questions, to resolve ambiguities, or to provide important context, or perhaps to apologize and seek resolution or healing. This is one of the aspects of the information age that can make grief particularly harrowing. When you delve into a deceased loved one's digital data, you could be opening a precious gift or a Pandora's box. Which one it will be is impossible to tell ahead of time, so be careful. Back to preparing for your own digital afterlife. Go old school. Papyrus scrolls from ancient Egypt are still with us, but our digitally stored information may be non-existent, inaccessible, and or unreadable in a few years, decades, or centuries' time, much less millennia. We just don't know. What we can say with comparative certainty, though, is that paper and other material objects might be vulnerable to the elements, but they won't fall victim to technological obsolescence. Even if you have confidence that your digital data will stick around a good long while, and even if you think you've ensured that others will be able to access it, things change. Technology evolves and obsolesces in predictably unpredictable ways. Given that, it's worth selectively transforming digital stuff into material stuff now and again. Make the occasional photo book of the images that you love the most or that commemorate special and meaningful occasions. Print out the electronic correspondence that's closest to your heart. Transcribe a passage of your online writing into a beautiful notebook that goes on a physical shelf. If you never get around to any of that, though, don't despair. The digital world hasn't destroyed your ability to connect with your loved ones and your ancestors in the same ways people always have. My memories of my grandparents are triggered by photographs and letters, but they may also bubble up when I see or touch or use a certain ring, or an old button in the sewing box, or a dog-eared and yellowing recipe card giving instructions for chocolate chip cookies. These things are reinforced and expanded in the mutual sharing of recollections with others who knew them. And I hold their stories in my heart and mind, and I pass them on to the next generation. The more things change, the more they stay the same. The paperback edition of my book, All the Ghosts in the Machine, came out in 2020. It's less of a planning tool and more of a general exploration of life, death, relationships, privacy, and the power of big tech in the digital era. It's written with a general reader in mind and obviously has lots more information about this area. You can see more of my writing and access podcasts where I've been a host or a guest on ElaineCasket.com. And you can follow my work on Twitter and Medium at Elaine Casket. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Elaine. That was so interesting and certainly very, very relevant in today's times. And one of those things that kind of made me think of is very much around young people nowadays. Very much after a sudden death, there would be kind of an influx of comments and conversations and discussions and recollections and memories on their social media account. And I suppose that's for people individually, whether they do draw some comfort from that or whether maybe they don't agree with it. But you've raised a really, really good points to ask us to consider, which is fantastic. Thank you. We're going to move on to the question and answer session for both Gary and Elaine. I believe Elaine is with us. And she's going to answer some questions as well if we have them. So I'll kick off with you, Gary. There's a couple in the chat here already. So wait till we see. So here we go, Gary. Who is ultimately legally responsible for the disposal of physical remains?
Interestingly, in law, nobody actually owns a deceased body. That's the first thing. However, the person who is responsible for disposal is often the executor of the will. They have a particular right to do it. Now, if nobody steps up and says, I'm looking after this funeral, an executor may be a solicitor, but often that's delegated to the next of kin to actually carry that out. But if nobody turns up and goes, hello, ultimately it falls to the state under the Public Health Act to actually say, we will provide this person with a burial or cremation. Normally it's burial, and therefore they're going to a public burial ground at one of the councils, but there's nobody who actually owns you once you have passed away. You're not considered a chattel under properties. There may be requirements to actually do things with regard to your estate, but that's not the actual body per se.
Lovely, thank you, Gary. Another one there we have, is there any other options other than burial or cremation?
Technically, yes, you can have persons buried or cremated, which is the normal means here in the island of Ireland and Northern Ireland. There is a thing called dissolvation, where your actually person is put, the remains are put into a liquid, and almost like this sounds dreadful, but this is the only way I can sort of think it in my head, like a pressure cooker type thing, but it's a big human one. And the person's remains are dissolved in a water/alkaline solution. It's practiced more in stateside. They also have what's called sky burial over there, i.e. the person, because of some of the Native American traditions, are just left to the elements and the various animals do what they do. But that's not something that's normally practiced here in our country, but there are a number of different things that can happen, but the main ones are burial and cremation. Other faith communities will create like a mausoleum above ground where the person's just left in there, and they will naturally dispose of the remains over a period of time, and like an heir. So, but those are not normal ones that happen here in NI.
Lovely, thank you. Very, very interesting, isn't it? Another wee quick one that came in at the start about natural burial grounds in Northern Ireland. Someone has come back to think there's only one natural burial ground in Wexford.
That's correct. Normally we normally have to transport folks across into ROI to carry out that. We don't. There has been a number of inquiries about that. The difficulty here is a lot of our water tables, and it's an environmental agency, when a person dissolves naturally over a period of time. It runs into our water table, and then that can affect our actual water supply, which we draw from many of our grounds, and that's normally the issue with around it. Environmental health have to be involved in doing quite a detailed survey, and the cost behind that is often prohibitive to actually have, as it were, a green burial site.
Okay, lovely, thank you. We have one here that says, are the baskets which contain our loved ones a popular choice? Are these expensive?
So the willow type coffins that you have nowadays are actually normally more expensive than a traditional coffin, purely because they're often hand woven. They range in price depending what you're going, but somewhere between £700 and £900 per casket, which is a willow base one, and it depends on the type that you're getting. That will vary depending on where the funeral director gets them from. They are used, but they're not as popular as people think. That people have a tendency to go for the more traditional type coffin, and purely that's because all coffins now have to be accredited to a certain standard so that you can lift them, but also in terms of the person has chosen to go for cremation, so that you don't create what's called a flashback at the crematorium and you would injure the crematorium staff. So they all have to be stamped and tested to a certain degree to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thank you. And then I suppose just leading on from that question from myself, the kind of alternative coffins and the different colours and things, are they quite accessible? You know, or how long would it take for, you know, one to be brought in? Are they here in Northern Ireland, or?
There are at least 3 or 4 coffin manufacturers based in the province here. Some people obviously get their coffins imported. It depends. I mean, you may have come across some that maybe had a coffin done in the colours of a football team or a particular thing that happens. They're called a wrap, and that does add normally an extra day or so onto the process of arranging a funeral. It shouldn't be more than that if they're locally based and locally sourced here. But again, it depends what is happening and what the person's looking for. But you can access. So again, your local funeral director should be able to advise on that particular issue.
Lovely, thank you. And another one just from me, Garrett, could you give us a kind of run through about like a step by step, you know, what happens from the point of collection of a body? You know, what, I suppose, debunk that myth for us all. Okay. What actually happens between that and the funeral?
Normally what happens is obviously the loved ones will contact their local funeral director and say, so-and-so has passed away. At that point, the funeral director will normally make contact with wherever that person has died, whether that's at home, hospice, in nursing care, residential care, or hospital. And at that point, they will effect removal from the individual. So if it's been in a hospital setting, they'll be brought down to the mortuary. Likewise, if it's at home, we will go to the home and we will make that removal from the person, who we treat very carefully as we do that removal. And most nowadays are placed within a body bag to ensure their integrity on it, and carefully lifted on a stretcher back into our place and brought back to our place. At that point, we have to wait until there's registration of the death. Normally that happens within a hospital setting, and it's done electronically currently because of the COVID act that's in place. So the doctor will issue the medical certificate of cause of death, and only they can do it. Certainly there are many nursing colleagues and paramedics who can verify life extinct, but it's ultimately the doctor that must give the medical certificate of death. And that's sent electronically to the General Register's office, who then will send that out to their local district registrar's office. At that point, the local district register will contact a family member who has been named, and they will complete the registration process. Once that is completed, then you get issued the copy certificates of death. And at that stage, I would advise all people, look, please get about 4 or 5 of them. At that stage, you pay about, I think it's roughly £8 at the moment per copy. If you go in 10 minutes later, having done the initial registration, there's suddenly £15. So it's more sensible to get it at the time of registration. And in terms of doing that, then that enables the General Register to issue what's called a Form GRO 21 or Form 14. It says to the funeral director, you have authorization to go ahead and proceed with this funeral. At that point, then we will make the necessary arrangements for their loved one to be prepared. And that can be a simple hygienic treatment, which is literally just preparing them and making them there. If a person's going to be a little time with the family or they want to go home, we would certainly be advising on all occasions to go for embalming of the individual, because it preserves them a little bit longer, makes them more presentable to family. And obviously, in the meantime, hopefully family have come in, finalized some of the arrangements, and then brought some of their clothing in, unless they're saying to us, we are needing to prepare the person and use a shirt or tie or a gown for them to put them on. Again, that's one of the things you may need to talk to. I know in our own situation, my mum had a lovely little red outfit that she wanted to wear, but at the time of her death, she had deteriorated so much, she was down to about 4 stone 10 and would never fitted in it. So we used a nice night dress that her sister had bought her just a few weeks beforehand, and she got buried, and she looked very well, I must admit. What I say to folks, look, if the person wants to have their own clothing, be it as in life, whatever they wore in life, if they were a t-shirt and jeans person, let's use that. If they were a shirt person, let them use that. And please always, and I say this sort of sensitively, if they wore underwear, please bring that in too, because we will dress them. Not many of us here run around au natural in Northern Ireland because it's not particularly warm here. And whatever you give us, we will put on them.
Lovely, thank you. I think that debunked a lot of myths, didn't it? Thank you so much. Great, we'll give you a wee break for a moment. And there's a question here in the chat for Elaine, and here we go. I'm just scrolling back up to it. A couple of comments there about kind of preparation for funerals and things in different countries. They're very interesting. Please have a look at them. Here we go. So there's one from Helen. Elaine, what do you mean by memorialization of Facebook? How is it organized?
I've pasted a few links in the chat for you guys, so please do have a look at those. And so basically all services and platforms have a one account, one user thing. So technically after the person is no longer around, that account is supposed to be frozen so nobody can log into it anymore. And this is another way that sometimes families get caught out. They assume if they have a password, they assume they'll be able to log in and do things or make changes. And then they might go in one day and remembering is above the person's name. It's been memorialized because by some other means the account holder has been verified or reported as deceased, and they use a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning sort of things to actually detect now the accounts of dead users. So this can be sort of memorialized out from underneath folks, but ideally if it's a more controlled situation in life, it's a good idea to go into your settings on Facebook. And I don't know if I have the capacity to share screen or not. I had pulled up my sort of screen, but it's in settings and it's in general. And if you go into the general settings, the fourth thing down says memorialization settings, decide what happens to your account after you pass away. And then here, thank you so much. I've just been given the co-hosting privileges. I will show you here. I will take you right through it. So I'm sharing my screen now for you. And you can see there, I've expanded it. So I put edit, it says your legacy, so there it is, general. Memorialization context, choose someone to look after your account, and then it shows the limited things that they're able to do. They manage tribute posts, they can request unilaterally the removal of your account, they can actually respond to new friend requests and so forth. Then you choose a person, which you do need to discuss that with them because it's a not insubstantial job. It's not like you have an executor of your estate, your physical estate, and then once the estate is done, it's done and it's closed. It's a job that could potentially go on for decades, and there is no legacy contact of the legacy contact. It's not like you can pass the torch to someone else. You could also, as you can see here, request that your account be deleted after you pass away. Here's some interesting stuff about Facebook: identity confirmation, social issues, it's all just very dystopian. But anyway, that's where the memorialization settings sit on Facebook. And then on Instagram, there's a form that you fill out to request memorialization, request to memorialize a deceased person's Instagram account. But they don't have the same kind of like legacy contact stuff. On Twitter, interestingly, they said over a year ago that they were going to start institute a memorialization policy after there was a big outcry from bereaved people over the deletion of disused accounts. But they haven't gotten very far with that from what I can work out. I think they're still trying to decide what to do. But the Digital Legacy Association link that I pasted in the chat there has a link for all sorts of hardware like phones and computers and everything, lots of the most commonly used social media things. And then there's also actual digital assets to consider, since cryptocurrencies and all these newfangled things are coming up. People might have an actually substantial amount of digital stuff that is worth money, sometimes like big money, that's really quite consequential for the estate. And so again, we have to start thinking about these, or how are these handled with regards to organizing those for those things, and passing on the requisite information. So it won't just all come right on its own. Because you could fetch up to an Apple store and say, hi, here's my husband's death certificate, here's his phone, he was the keeper of all the family photographs, I need to get to this. Apple will be like, I'm so sorry for your loss, sorry, can't do it. And people are often really surprised, but that's the deal, and that's why it's so important to plan.
So some really, really practical tips. I would consider myself to be quite social media savvy, and I did not know any of that. So that is fabulous. Thank you. And I suppose another thing, I know lots of people took up COVID hobbies during the different lockdowns and that. And my kind of challenge during the first lockdown was to go on and download all of my photos from my phone and start getting those printed out and things, because I just had files and files of photographs I had never got printed. And it did, I think it was the start of the COVID pandemic, kind of dawned on me, my goodness, my family will have no photos of us as a family because I haven't got them printed out. So
absolutely, I need to underscore what you were saying. If you do not transform the photos and things that you have in all of your accounts, the chances are extremely, extremely high that you in your older age, your children, your grandchildren, anybody will not see any of that. We always think, oh, online's forever. Well, things change. You can't get hold of MySpace accounts from 2000 sort of 7. Like it just because we have this online is forever, it does not mean that it's true. And it's very, very likely that your great grandchildren will be able to have a photo book, for example, that you've printed out today, but will have no mechanism for seeing something that you posted on your Instagram account. It just won't happen. So for my own dotage, as well as for my daughter and everything, I do periodically do exactly what you did. It's actually a really nice exercise from amongst all these thousands of things to say, what are the 100 things that are most special, that really matter to me, that I want to take care and thought and reflection to assemble for myself. And that's an act of love, and that's an act of paying attention, and that can be really grounding in a time when there's lots of information flying all around.
Fabulous, folks. So let that everybody's warning, get your photos printed out. Fantastic, thank you. Another wee final question for Gary. I want to be cremated, so I prefer a cardboard coffin. Is this possible? And if so, how much?
Technically, yes, it is possible. However, the cardboard coffin is not as cheap as people think it is, because it has this certain cremated style. Normally run between 250, 400 pounds for a coffin out there. And the reason why that is, as I talked about this flashpoint, when a cremator is charged, in other words, the computerized system says this cremator is now ready for this person to receive the coffin. As it goes in, a cremator is normally sitting about 500 degrees C at any one time. So the instant anything that's combustible comes into that sort of heat, like when you open your oven door and you get hit with that waft of heat before you've put your roast in or something, take it up about another 2 times that, and that's the sort of heat, and that coffin will instantly start to combust at that point. It's then sealed, and then it rises up to about 1500 degrees C. So it's fairly intensive, and that's the reason why they have to be accredited to maintain that initial what's called charging. Probably a cheapest coffin, even made out of the wood that is approved, is somewhere between 350 and 500 pounds. It depends on the maker and what the funeral director. So there's not much of a difference in that there.
Lovely. Thank you for answering that, Gary. Gary, you're very optimistic that we're opening the oven for the roast. I'm opening the oven, getting that waft out when I've put the plates on to heat for the Chinese coming.
Yeah, it's normally pizza from our house being reheated from the day before.
Oh, lovely. Very good. Very good. There's a comment in there about donating body to medical science. Have a wee look at it. It's really interesting. Lots of different comments. Yeah.
Again, that is something that a lot of people would normally choose. The reality is 95% of those folks who choose to be very altruistic and offer their bodies for donation cannot be accepted. The Northern Ireland Queen's University Anatomical Department have specific guidance and key things in place that must be hit before they will accept an individual. And even though I look very healthy on the outside, with all my comorbidities and the badness I've done in my life, dear only knows what I am like on the inside, and I'm sure all the normal organs would be destroyed, and the medical students would not want to find out what's going on inside of me. So 95% are actually rejected at any one time, and that's down to different things, down to their what they died about, what other comorbidities was going on. So you need to, even though you're thinking going down that route, please think of an alternative, because it could come back and they may say no, and then that causes some issues for families. And again, this is regulated under the Human Tissue Act. And what you can do with those remains that are afterwards. And sometimes there's a service where those remains are cremated on block for those who've been very kindly offering their remains for anatomical dissection and use for the medical people.
Lovely. And Gary, sorry, maybe covered, but how would you go about if that was something you were interested in? Where could we find more information on that?
You will find it on the Queen's anatomical site. It should be, if you go to the Queen's University Belfast site, there is the anatomical, and they should have a link there that says, I want to donate my body to medical science, and how we do that. And that's where we do it.
Lovely. Thank you so much. That's super. And again, just to point people in the direction of, there's some comments on there about highlighting information about the Kiwi Coffin Club in New Zealand is really interesting. Please have a look at it. And lots of people coming in and saying about printing photos, which is fantastic. Excellent. Well done, folks. Thank you so much. I think that's all been really, really interesting, and thanks to Elaine and Gary. And Gary, I think we'll all agree we're very sorry for losses you've had recently, and thank you for joining us today. Folks,
so someone's just asked there, Jenny, what's the cost of an average funeral? Within the province here, it's round about for burial. It's round about £3,500 to £4,000. For cremation, it's round about £4,200 to about £5,000. It depends on the funeral director and what aspects are included within the actual service. So that's giving you a ballpark figure. England's slightly dearer. We still have a tendency to go for a burial funeral service here rather than cremation, but that's changing and has changed over the year. And part of the reason, because of the higher price for cremation, is that most of us live outside of Belfast, and therefore there's a non-residence charge that has to be added onto that. And cremation is currently about £642 plus the medical fees that are necessary for the doctors to certify that this can go ahead, whereas burial, it'll depend on your particular cemetery that you go on, and that varies depending on whether you're purchasing a grave and also opening the grave, or you're just reopening a grave that you already have purchased.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gary. There's a wee comment in there about, can I ask if the certificate will be in attendance for today? If someone maybe from the steering group could go back to that. And Elaine has also very kindly posted up a link, a YouTube link to her feature film documentary about death in the digital world. And just lots of thanks coming in as well. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Folks, what we're going to do now is we are going to have Margaret back to share some more very beautiful words that she has penned following the death of her husband.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm just knocked out. What a wonderful session this has been this morning, and thanks to everybody. I can only endorse all that we've heard, and we'd just like to add the importance of doing as much decluttering as you can when you're still able to do it, especially making sure that your family know where important things are, like the wills and maybe insurance certificates and things like that. Paul had made good financial provision for us, but he was a terrible hoarder. And I literally had mountains of paperwork to climb through and over and till I found all the relevant certificates and what have you. And that can actually be quite emotionally draining as well as physically. So it is quite important to get all that done. And I would just put in a wee word for the Your Life, Your Choices book by Macmillan. That is a really, really invaluable thing. I'd like to say that I've filled mine out, but I haven't. I've actually got around to talking to my children about it and have thought about it, but it's really worth looking at, and it helps you guide you through all the planning that you have to do. And again, your family will then know where it is and where it's all written down. Time does help you learn to live with bereavement. You never get over it, but the hurt becomes less raw. And we find commemorating the first anniversary of Paul's death was a milestone along that road. When we'd been visiting him in the hospice in the last few weeks, we often saw wild swans flying up the river. And on the morning of his first anniversary, I actually, as I stepped out of the door to go to the early morning service, a skein of swans flew over my head, which I actually found quite moving and comforting. So I just wrote these very few little words. Wild swans overhead, steady wing beats are a balm. Your soul soars free. And that afternoon, then one of the ministers very kindly came to the graveside and read a few prayers for us. And I read a little poem that I had written. Without you, I venture forth uncertainly. You were always the gentle breeze that filled my sails, the steady hand on the tiller, the safe haven, a welcome home. You left sure hands to chart my course, enduring love to still the waves, the knowledge of the grace of God to guide me home. And just to finish off, there will always be reminders as you go on. A favorite piece of music maybe on the radio, finding a piece of paper with his writing on it, and a grandson's smile. But over the time, the balance shifts, and the pleasure that the memories bring gradually outweigh the sadness. And I found a little box that he bought a little notebook in. The gift, an empty box, or so I thought. Lift up the lid, my heart stands still. A folded page, an envelope, under tissue, a tiny book. On the cover, a thought so sweet, I feel your love across the void. That's my finish. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share this. I hope, maybe they will be able to bring comfort to some and to help.
Margaret, thank you so much. Those words are just stunning. And again, so brave of you to come on and share such personal and intimate poetry for your husband. Thank you so much. I'm speaking on behalf of everybody when I say that. Thank you. Folks, we're heading towards the end of our session today, and I'm going to ask Mr. Donal Henderson, who's Chief Executive of Foyle Hospice, to give us a few words in closing.
Sound. Thank you very much, Jenny. I have to say it's really overwhelming and really positive to see so many people attending this morning's and afternoon session as part of Dying Matters Week. I just sort of tried to gather a few thoughts about, and having listened to all of the presenters today, I'm reminded that last night I was just reading an article on social media which was promoting today's event, and it said about You know, it was an event encouraging people to talk about death and dying, and one of the comments was that it sounds like a barrel of laughs, and I think that was sort of said in quite a sarcastic way. I mean, I don't think any of us would argue that it's a laughing matter, and that's not to say that we can't put our own sense of humour as a stamp on our plans. At the end of the day, your death is really very much about you, and you know, that's not sort of to undermine the fact that it can be a very serious, it's a very emotive, it's a very sensitive subject for most, if not all of us. But I think the one thing out of all of that to remember is that the subject of death and dying is a very important one. And I think, for me anyway, and I don't know about everybody else, but you know, the fear, I think the fear of death, I think it's not so much maybe about the fear of death. I think the fear is about not being in control, that you don't have any control over your own death. But what you can do by planning and looking forward, I think if anything around that, you can record your own wishes, which enables you then to take some control over perhaps how you die and how your final journey might be, and sharing all of those wishes with those that are closest to you. I know back, you know, when I bought my first home, I sort of was very reluctant to make a will because I was always reminded of the Alanis Morissette lyrics, "Old man turned 98, won the lottery, and he died the next day." So I always had this fear, I suppose, that there would be a really strange coincidence that you would make your will and within a matter of days that you would die. So back to some of the earlier speakers saying, you know, that I think there was a great sense of trepidation that by making a will would somehow catalyze my own death. So 5 years down the line, having made my will, I'm still here, but unfortunately I haven't had any lottery win to date either. And I'm not quite 98 yet, but anyway. But I think what I now realize from all of that is that it's not so much about what might happen or might not happen, as the case may be, but I think it's a recognition of my own mortality, in that you're thinking, you know, I want to make sure that these plans are in place, not partly for myself, but also for those that will be left behind. And a more recent example I had with a family member was where we were visiting a cemetery recently, and they noticed within the cemetery itself that there wasn't a lot of space left. And they turned to me and said, well, that doesn't really matter because I want to be cremated anyway. And I said to them, well, have you told people that that's what you want? And they were kind of like, no, I haven't actually. And I said, well, you know, that's something that you maybe want to put down. I said, you've told me now, but, you know, you need to tell those people that will be responsible for organising your funeral, because it won't be me, more than likely. And I suppose as well, there is that assumption because of your Black background and your upbringing that you might have a traditional burial. But I think it's also important for us to make it clear as to whether we want that religious service or not. I think today as well, you know, I think Elaine's given a lot of food for thought for me, certainly around the digital footprint and or digital being, and it's much more extensive than any of us perhaps realise. So I think, to summarise everything up, you know, facilitating a good death and planning ahead allows us more time to spend together with those that we love and without worrying what might be ahead. And I suppose essentially it can change the way we live because we don't have to worry about those things anymore. Everything is in place, so to speak. And that I think that can be particularly helpful for those who are left grieving where there's a case of a sudden or an unexpected death, particularly. You know, where everything is in place regardless of the cause of death. So it's been really overwhelming to see the attendance for today, and very reassuring to see the positive approach to conversations and around death and dying. And, you know, as Alison said at the start of the session, we are liable to talk about our own family and our own experiences. And I think that's very much because we're comfortable with those discussions because they are our own personal experiences. So, I mean, the other thing I'll just sort of take the opportunity to, and I'll put it in the chat, is that coincidentally, Make a Will Month with Foyle Hospice is coinciding with Dying Matters Week. The month of May is Make a Will Month here. So if anybody, here hasn't already got their will made, there's opportunities with solicitors to facilitate that, and they're doing it at no cost for the month of May. So I've just put the link in the chat there if anybody wants to follow up on that and take advantage of that situation, because making a will is one of the 5 steps to well-being for a good death. So Jenny, thanks very much to you for chairing the session today. Thanks also to our speakers, to Alison, to John, to Gary, Aline, and of course Margaret, who's on our project management board with Compassionate Communities Northwest. She speaks very openly about her personal experience, very honest, very open, and it is very thought-provoking. So thanks to you, Margaret, for that as well. And a particular word of thanks as well to the Compassionate Communities steering groups, both in the Northern and the Western Trust, for coordinating and facilitating today's event, and anyone else who was involved in making this session today, or this webinar, a reality. And Project Echo as well for facilitating. So on that note, I mean, I have nothing further to say other than thank you all very much. This has obviously provoked a lot of conversation. Hopefully it doesn't stop here, and I think certainly, you know, once we're open to those conversations, there is so much that we can do, and as I say, that can essentially change the way we live, by planning ahead. So thank you to everyone for coming along, and thanks to all of our speakers and all those who've attended. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you so much, Donald. It's maybe not the lottery, but the downtown cash call this week is 100,000. If you want to try your luck with that. So thank you so much, everybody. There's a couple of comments just in there, or we'll say lots of comments, and just thanking Margaret as well. And people asking for, you know, is there a link to Margaret's poetry? Someone has very kindly popped it in. Donald has popped in the link about Make a Will Month. Gary has also offered his advice and support to anybody who would like to contact him. Someone has popped in a link as well for the Your Life, Your Choices book. And again, just to say, if anybody at all would like a hard copy of that, we have a massive stock in the MIAP office. We are quite happy to post those out to anybody who needs one, or the Dying Matters leaflet as well. And folks, I suppose just with all events, what we would really love to do is get some feedback from you. And we would love to find out a wee bit more, I suppose, about maybe what you've learned today. And also we're going to ask you to pop in the chat as well if there's any other topics that you would like to hear about in regards to end of life or palliative care. You can pop those in the chat. So there's a wee evaluation coming up on your screen. And then again, if you can pop in the chat if there's any other topics that you would like to see. And we'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. And then at the end, we have a lovely video from St. Agnes' Choir called Thankful that will play us out. And again, just again to highlight, please pop into Twitter and tweet about today. Today is Dying, or this week is Dying Matters Week. You know, please spread the word, start the conversation, and let's keep the talk going about this as well. So fantastic, thank you. And then if we're going to finish off just with our lovely video from St. Agnes' Choir.
There's so much to be thankful